Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our webcast for March 28th, 2019. There have been some really striking developments in the last 2 weeks. We did not do a webcast last week, so we'll try and catch you up on some of them. But we have to start with the most important, which is the release of the Mueller report, the importance of this for the fact that Mueller admitted that he could find no evidence of collusion by Donald Trump or his campaign with the Russians, his refusal to make a decision as to whether or not there was obstruction. But at the same time, it left the lie in the report that the Russians interfered in the US election. But this represents an opportunity now to drive a stake through the heart of the British Empire. So Helga, why don't you give us your assessment of the Mueller report and its aftermath?
Well, I think it is quite remarkable that, Mueller was not even able to fabricate some evidence. But, it basically means that 2 years of what Trump characterized many times as a witch hunt did not lead to the desired result. I must say that it's quite remarkable that Trump withstood all of this. And in one tweet, he said that this must never happen again, because he would not know of many people who could handle this. And that's probably true, because the coordinated campaign against him was international. It was media, it was intelligence, it was establishments of other countries. So I think it's a major development that he is now free of that. And in one of his tweets, he did refer to the fact that he is quite aware of the role of the British in all of this. So I think that this is a very important development. I think the fact that Attorney General Barr also said that there is no evidence of obstruction of justice is important. But I think the most plausible argument for that was given by Pat Lang, who said, given the fact that there was no Russian collusion, there was no crime, and where there was no crime, there is no obstruction of justice. And I think that that is it. So now we have to see how this unfolds. This will have all kinds of immediate and medium-term ramification. Congressman Nunes, who is a ranking member in the House Intelligence Committee, basically said that on Tuesday next week, he will make a criminal referral to the Attorney General to investigate all of this, to go after the what he calls dirty cops in the FBI and in the Department of Justice, and that he will basically demand that all of these things be investigated. So I think, there is a chorus of people who say, now is the time of reckoning. Now we have to look at, who did that, who paid for it. And Nunes also said that he wants to find out what was actually the scope of the mandate for Mueller. What was he supposed to look for? So I think this will be a very interesting fight. But as much as this is reason to have relief, I think we should also be not, not leave down the attention and the guard, because as long as the British Empire and this apparatus, which went after Trump in what some people correctly call the biggest scandal in American history, unless this apparatus is really dismantled, they will find new ways to entrap the whole situation. And one example, I think we can see, that President Trump, who is absolutely right on when he says that he is the president who wants to end the permanent wars around the world, who wants to withdraw US troops from Afghanistan and Syria. But I think a very weak flank is what is happening around Venezuela. And I think, the role of Vice President Pence and Bolton and Pompeo in that is really on the question of regime change. And the danger is that Trump is being pulled into this. There was just this ad hoc press conference in the White House where Pence apparently walked in with the wife of the self-appointed so-called president of Venezuela, Guaido, and gave a press conference, and Trump then gave a press conference together with her. This is a story unfolding, so I don't have a final assessment on it. But, I think Pompeo called Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia 2 days ago and warned Russia not to meddle in Venezuela, that the United States would not sit idly by. Now, obviously, Lavrov answered to that by saying that, the warning the United States of not intending to make a coup against the legitimate government of Venezuela, that this violates international law, the UN Charter, and so forth. But as you can see, this is an extremely dangerous situation. And, one can only hope that the people who demand that a political solution is found will prevail. The Brazilian defense minister said that Brazil will have absolutely no participation in any military approach. But this ad hoc press conference in the White House is worrisome because, they were going fully with, the wife of Guaido was fully saying children are dying, which probably is very true. But, the pretext of a humanitarian intervention is really a very dangerous moment. Otherwise, I think President Trump, he has to be lauded for having withstood this incredible Russiagate. But I think we have to be really very attentive and give him support so that he does not, fall into these kinds of scenarios, which could bring about a confrontation with Russia very quickly.
Well, I think, Helga, that's one of the reasons it's important not to drop the fight against the overall intent behind the Mueller investigation, which we said from the beginning was not so much about Trump, but about Trump's desire to end the geopolitical confrontation with Russia and China. And this is clear because all the coverage of the report says that the Russian interference is still clear. Even Mitch McConnell said we've got to watch out for Russia. And now we see this new coalition coming together, which is not new at all. It's the old neocons, but the Committee on the Present Danger has been reconstituted, this time targeting China. What can you say about that?
Well, I think that the question of Trump fulfilling the potential of improving relations with Russia and China, this is what the whole Mueller investigation was all about. This was what the Christopher Steele British intelligence operation was all about. And I think it is important to keep that up front and, make sure that all the documents related to to the British role in this whole scandal be made public. I think it's now the time to interview William Binney, who has given the absolute undeniable forensic evidence that there was no Russian hacking. And that is the cornerstone of the whole meddling. And therefore, I think that the whole Muellergate or Russiagate has turned into Muellergate. And I think now is the time to investigate what William Binney has produced, because that is one of the very important truths which have to come out in this effect. Now, Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, said that now that the Mueller investigation is over, that Russia will make a very thorough investigation of what happened with this anti-Russian propaganda campaign, also by journalists masking as journalists in reality being part of this intelligence operation, that this will be investigated very thoroughly and be presented to the international public. But this is a war and a half. So I can only tell people, do not be complacent. This is a battle which is not yet over at all.
For people who want to see what Bill Binney said, there's an excellent interview with him by Jason Ross that's available on the LaRouche PAC site. It's up on YouTube. And I interviewed him yesterday, and he continued to emphasize the importance of exposing the lies that are told by the intelligence community and the role of the British in this, to disrupt a positive U.S.-Russian relationship. Now, the other development that's quite striking is Xi Jinping's trip to Europe, first to Italy, where they signed a memo of understanding, and then to France. It looks as though the whole question of the new Silk Road, as you've always said, is unstoppable. And people such as Macron and Merkel may be realizing that. Is that your assessment of what happened this last week?
Yes, I think, let me first say a word about the Italian part of Xi Jinping's visit. This was truly remarkable because there was huge pressure on the Italian government to not sign the memorandum of understanding, including coming from Garrett Marcus from the national security from the White House, saying there will be no economic advantage for Italy. It will ruin the Italian reputation forever globally. Italy went along. They signed the memorandum of understanding. And as Michele Geraci, who is the architect of this whole program, said, the deals which were signed in the context of Xi Jinping visits is just the beginning. These were all agreements which were made out long, long before, and with the memorandum of understanding, now a whole new phase of economic cooperation, scientific cooperation will start. Xi Jinping also went to Palermo, and basically everybody stressed the enormous potential of southern Italy and Sicily, which obviously are very close to Africa, and therefore, can become the bridge of a Chinese-Italian joint cooperation in the industrialization of Africa. And I think that is one of the most important aspects of this whole arrangement, because it shows the way of how to deal with the migrant crisis and how to, in a human way, deal with a problem which the EU has been utterly incapable of dealing with. Now, this was a big breakthrough. And, then Xi Jinping went on to Monaco and to Paris, where he met with Merkel, Macron, Juncker from the EU. And they basically, it was basically an expression, I think the Europeans are clearly in a dilemma. Because of their frictions with the United States. And unfortunately, they don't differentiate between Trump and other elements of his administration. But they are trying to find, as Mrs. Merkel was saying, they do not want to live in a unilateral world, but they want to build a multipolar world. And, given the strategic realities, there is no way how you can do that without having an alliance or some cooperation in depth with China. Now, I think that the momentum of the Silk Road, the new Silk Road, and all the economic opportunities which go along with it, China is, after all, still the fastest growing market in the world. I think for the EU, China is the second largest trade partner after the United States. For China, the EU is the largest trade partner. So I think the dynamic is clearly going in the integration of all of this. And Michele Geraci, who immediately after the visit of Xi Jinping went on to the Boao Economic Forum in China, which is the Chinese equivalent of the Davos Forum, where he gave a very upbeat interview, I think, to the South China Morning Post. And he said, all the critics of Italy, they're just jealous. And he predicted that, it will be just a short period of time until every European country will have joined step by step. And he said there are already 2 countries ready to sign the memorandum of understanding. This is already in the pipeline. So he was very optimistic. And then also other people from Italy basically said, this is, and Geraci too, this is not directed against Italy's allies. The historical ally number 1 for Italy is the United States, and naturally also Europe. But basically, Italy can play a very important role of mediation between on the one side, the other European countries and China, between the United States and Europe, and the United States and China. So I think that Italy has a completely new self-confidence in that. And we will hear a lot more because, they also expect to come out stronger in the coming European Parliament election in May. So I think this has put Macron and Merkel and Juncker, for that matter, in a position, where they, on the one side, cannot deny the economic advantages. For example, Macron signed deals worth 40 billion. 20 billion of this was, European projects like 300 Airbuses. The Airbus is a German, French, Italian, British consortium. And 300 Airbuses is not little, but then 20 more billion were just different deals between France and China. I think very important is joint space agreement, where France will now participate in the next lunar mission of China, the Chang'e 6, and they will bring back samples from the moon together. So I think, also nuclear cooperation and other high technology cooperation was resided. So I think, there is something which, I don't know if I know the English word, that were something like the normative power of the facts. And I think this is what's operating because, it is very clear that Europe has absolutely no future without the cooperation with China. And one can only hope that, the efforts by the neocons to ruin that, you mentioned the new version of the Committee on the Present Danger / China. They say that the old Committee on the Present Danger helped to, to defeat the Soviet Union, and that now the big existential enemy is China, and therefore all efforts have to be directed against that. So I think this is really, really bad because, this is the old geopolitical thinking, which can only lead the world into the Thucydides trap. And actually, you can really see who are the paid media who spout that line. On the same day, this Committee on the Present Danger China was refounded. Bild-Zeitung, the German tabloid, had almost the entire page 2 devoted to 8 lies against China, which don't hold. Nobody, who has any dealings with China believes it, but the propaganda effort is absolutely unabated.
And your mentioning of Bild brings to mind this fight of two paradigms, which is increasingly in the open. One of the lies is that China is setting up a debt trap, but for the countries that work with them. But you just had the statement from the port director of Djibouti. There's not only no debt trap, but this is the direction that they want to go. I think the ability to continue these lies is being taken on very directly by the Chinese. But it's crucial that we, as the Schiller Institute and our supporters, continue to expose the operations that are being run, like the CPD China, the Committee on Present Danger China, and so on. Now, Helga, the other thing, you mentioned the French-Chinese space cooperation. President Trump yesterday had a very significant announcement on restoring the U.S. with a commitment to be on the moon. How do you see that as possible fitting into a collaboration with China, but also the importance of this in contrast to the dead-end existentialism of the Green New Deal?
Well, I think this is very good because, when President Trump had first announced his space plans in December 2017, it was very, very optimistic. And it just happened that was on the very same day we had a conference on the memory and works of the German-American space pioneer Kraft Ericke. And then came into the conference the announcement of Trump using almost exactly the same Hubble pictures about, pictures of the galaxies and so forth. So it really caused an incredible excitement. And what he now basically announced is that the United States plans to be back on the moon by 2024 and have a sustainable presence on the moon by 28, probably meaning the beginning of moon villages, and then having a Moon Mars Directorate to start working on interstellar and further space travel in the future. So I think that's exactly the kind of optimistic future orientation which is needed. And Trump also mentioned that the United States will do that with international partners. And I think this is extremely important because obviously the universe is so big. 2 trillion galaxies have been found so far that there is really the need for the entire human species to cooperate on these kinds of projects. So I think this is a very positive step in the right direction. And obviously it shows how utterly stupid and incompetent the proponents of the Green New Deal are, because they believe that we are living in a earthbound system with scarce resources, but especially space travel and the enormous potential to go to higher flux, energy flux densities, like, for example, fusion. One project of the Chinese, which now the French are participating, is bringing samples of helium-3 back from the far side of the moon as a potential fuel for fusion power on Earth. So I think that is the future, and hopefully, we can move civilization as quickly as possible to that kind of international cooperation as the only basis for peace.
There was just an article in the Baltimore Sun on the danger to the Earth from asteroids, that this is a much more serious threat than anything that the so-called man-made climate change represents. And it brings to mind the importance of a proposal that your husband, Lyndon LaRouche, made on the idea of cooperation, that it's not just sitting around and feeling good by working with other countries, but we have an immediate purpose, both to explore, but also to defend the Earth, his idea of the strategic defense of Earth. And I think given this Baltimore Sun article, it brings again this question that he had in mind: how do we work as a human race to defend the Earth and expand? And I'd like your thoughts on that.
Well, I think what this Mr. McKinnon said, who is a space consultant of the Pentagon, he pointed to the fact that in December of last year, an asteroid exploded only 15 miles above the Earth. Now, from the standpoint of distances in space, 15 miles is nothing. It could have as easily have exploded on Earth, causing a tremendous damage. He said that if that or even that explosion had 15 times the force of the bomb of Hiroshima. So, and he said the danger of to human civilization coming from such asteroids is a zillion times bigger than climate change. But he says the political situation is so toxic that once you question man-made climate change, then you immediately are being put on a list of some group as an enemy. And that's unfortunately the reality of it. So I think we should, again, take this warning shot of this asteroid explosion, like we should have taken the similar event in Russia 2 years ago, as a immediate focus and motivation to go for an international cooperation on the defense of the planet against asteroids, comets, and other dangers coming from outer space. I think, my husband had already many years ago proposed that we need to have this kind of international cooperation involving Russia, China, the United States, and India, and naturally this being open for the cooperation of other nations, that we devote our energies to the common aims of mankind. And asteroid defense is just one of the many things we have to solve.
And I think this brings us back around to what we've been discussing for the last 25 minutes, which is that there is a potential now that we can move ahead into this new paradigm of cooperation, great power agreements to end the unipolar world, which would be a fulfillment of what Lyndon LaRouche stood for his whole life and what our movement is going to continue the fight for. And with the Mueller report, as it becomes clear that there are criminals in the FBI and the Justice Department, and have been for years, it brings up again the question of the exoneration of your husband. And we are conducting a campaign, a mobilization, that one of the best ways President Trump can follow up what he's calling an exoneration from the lies of the British and the neocons would be to exonerate Lyndon LaRouche. And Helga, if you'd like to say something about that, I think this would be an appropriate moment.
Well, it's not just that justice must be given to my husband, who was innocently prosecuted by the same apparatus like the one going after Trump for the last 2 years. But it is the policy of war and peace, because if the people who conducted this operation against him and then against Trump remain in place, even if you defeat one aspect of their scenario, like it happened now that the Mueller report did not produce any evidence, which is a big defeat for them. And obviously, all the people who hysterically pushed that line, they ended up with really being completely discredited. But I think, you will see, as you see in the Venezuela situation, they will try to come up again and again with new aspects. As a matter of fact, the Venezuela escalation, I would say, is the continuation of the coup against Trump with other colors. If you understand that the aim is to prevent Trump from having collaboration and good relations with Russia and China, and that the Venezuela crisis could immediately be another such crisis point, ruining that relation, then you understand that these forces must be overcome and be replaced by a policy of cooperation for a new paradigm among all nations on this planet, if we don't want to destroy each other. Now, my husband's name stands for the new paradigm like no other name in present history or the history of the last 96 years for sure. And therefore, anybody who wants to do something to maintain peace, I really appeal to you that you should act immediately. On this website, you find a petition, which I want you to not only sign. It's an appeal to Trump that he must exonerate Mr. LaRouche, but that you help us to spread this message as far as possible. Give it to your friends, colleagues, put it on your social media, get more people to sign this petition for the exoneration, and also contact us to help, because we plan to absolutely escalate this campaign until we have succeeded and the name of my husband is absolutely cleared, because this is a precondition that people can really study the absolutely beautiful ideas he has produced, and which was the reason why he was attacked so massively. So please sign this petition immediately, become a member of the Schiller Institute, and become active with us. It's one of the most important moments in history.
And take responsibility for making sure that people see this webcast every single week, where Helga will be talking with you. So Helga, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll see you next week.
Next week, till then.